and welcome to Read Aloud with me, Dan. Dan Simpson. Commie Knoxville. Hammer Dan Sicklepants, whatever you want to call me. And hello, comrades. Really nice to be with you today. Love your face. We're going to read from Opposed Book Worship by Mao Zedong. It was written in 1930 it was directed at the leaders of the Red Army who Mao felt were dogmatists. And we're going to get into section 1. No investigation, no right to speak. Mao says, unless you have investigated a problem, you will be deprived of the right to speak on it. Isn't that too harsh? Not in the least. When you have not probed into a problem, into the present facts and its past history, and know nothing of its essentials, whatever you say about it will undoubtedly be nonsense. He just gets right to the point. And he makes it very understandable. It only takes one look at any online comments section to see the breadth and depth of Philistines who want to speak on something they don't know anything about. Being part of a revolutionary organization should be different. He says talking nonsense solves no problems. As everyone knows. So, why is it unjust to deprive you of the right to speak? Quite a few comrades always keep their eyes shut and talk nonsense. And for a communist, that is disgraceful. How can a communist keep his eyes shut and talk nonsense? It won't do. It won't do. You must investigate. You must not talk nonsense. And if you're not already loving this, I don't know what you do like, because this is just awesome. Just stop talking nonsense, please. Please stop talking nonsense. In this chapter, Mao politely says, please, sir, shut the fuck up. Adults are speaking. This section, this chapter, whatever. Really, this goes for like productive conversations everywhere, but especially so for party work. As in, if two people are riffing and they're banging out important stuff, and you're like, well, I've done none of the work. Wouldn't you like to know my opinions about all of this? I'm just going to suggest you don't. And you just shut the fuck up and listen to the people. Because you might not know everything they're talking about, but you'll pick up on some stuff. And then you'll be able to go and investigate yourself before trying to chime in the conversation. And instead of sounding smart, sounding like an idiot to people who have done the work. That's what he says. If you haven't done the work, you probably are unaware of how silly you look. No investigation. No right to speak. Section 2. To investigate a problem is to solve it. So he's going to go from saying no investigation, no right to speak. Okay, well, what does it mean to investigate? How do I know when I can speak? How do I know when it is the case that I've done the investigation? Mao? Huh? When do I get to talk? He says, when you've solved the problem. Mao says, you can't solve a problem? Well, get down and investigate the present facts and its past history. When you have investigated the problem thoroughly, you will know how to solve it. Conclusions invariably come after investigation and not before. Anyone who's ever investigated a problem knows that's the case. Sometimes you get lucky and guess, but only until you've done the investigation do you know if your guess is accurate or not. Mao says, only a blockhead cudgels his brain on his own, or together with a group to find solution, or evolve an idea, without making any investigation. He says a blockhead. He says it must be stressed that this cannot possibly lead to any effective solution or any good idea. In other words, he is bound to arrive at a wrong solution and a wrong idea. There are not a few comrades doing inspection work, as well as guerrilla leaders and cadres newly in office, who like to make political pronouncements the moment they arrive at a place, and who strut about, criticizing this and condemning that, when they have only seen the surface of things or minor details. Such purely subjective, nonsensical talk is indeed detestable. These people are bound to make a mess of things, lose the confidence of the masses, and prove incapable of solving any problem at all. You're starting to get an idea of who Mao had in mind when he wrote this, aren't you? He doesn't exactly name names, but you don't need names when you see their behaviors. He says when they come across difficult problems, quite a number of people in leading positions simply heave a sigh without being able to solve them. They lose patience and ask to be transferred on the ground that they have not the ability and cannot do the job. These are cowards' words. Just get moving on your own two legs. Go the rounds of every section placed under your charge and inquire into everything, as Confucius did. And then you will be able to solve the problems, however little is your ability. For, although your head may be empty before you go out of doors, it will be empty no longer when you return, but will contain all sorts of material necessary for the solution of the problems. And that is how problems are solved. In this section, Mao says, touch grass, and you can solve your problems. He says, well, actually, do you have to touch grass, actually, the grass itself? Well, not necessarily. He says you don't actually have to touch grass. He says, but you can call a fact-finding meeting of people familiar with the situation in order to get at the source of what you call a difficult problem, and come to know how it stands now, and then it will be easy to solve your difficult problem. Investigation may be likened to the long months of pregnancy, and solving a problem to the day of birth. To investigate a problem, indeed, is to solve it. With me for 1 second. Thank you. In this section, to investigate a problem is to solve it. Mao says, guys, what does it mean to look into something? To look into it means you investigated a problem and you know how to solve it. Section 3. Oppose book worship. Oppose book worship. Again, I mentioned that when you read this text, you should, when you read the words book worship, replace those words with the word dogmatism. In fact, maybe I'll just do that when I read this. I'm just going to say dogmatism instead. It'll actually make more sense, I think. So let's do that. Section 3, oppose book worship. Mao says, whatever is written in a book is right. Such is still the mentality of culturally backward Chinese peasants. Strangely enough, within the Communist Party, there are also people who always say in a discussion, show me where it's written in the book. When we say that a directive of a higher organ of leadership is correct, that is not because it comes from a higher organ of leadership, but because its contents conform with both the objective and subjective circumstances of the struggle and meet its requirements. It is quite wrong to take a formalistic attitude and blindly carry out directives without discussing and examining them in the light of actual conditions, simply because they come from a higher organ. It is the mischief done by this formalism which explains why the line and tactics of the party do not take deeper root among the masses. To carry out a directive of a higher organ blindly, and seemingly without any disagreement, is not really to carry it out, but is the most artful way of opposing or sabotaging it. He says, hey, if you're told to do something, it's because we think it fits the reality. But if you just go and do it blindly, without investigating it yourself, actually, you could be fucking the whole thing up, the whole project. Now says the method of studying the social sciences exclusively from the book is likewise extremely dangerous and may even lead one onto the road of counter-revolution. Welcome in all comrades. Mao says clear proof of this is provided by the fact that whole batches of Chinese communists who confined themselves to books in their study of the social sciences have turned into counter-revolutionaries. When we say Marxism is correct, it is certainly not because Marx was a prophet, but because he studied prophet. But because his theory has been proved correct in our practice and in our struggle. We need Marxism in our struggle. In our acceptance of his theory, no such formalization of mystical notion as that of prophecy ever enters into our minds. Many who have read Marxist books have become renegades from the revolution, whereas illiterate workers often grasp Marxism very well. Of course, we should study Marxist books, but this study must be integrated with our country's actual conditions. We need books, but we must overcome dogmatism, which is divorced from the actual situation. He says, how can we overcome book worship? The only way is to investigate the actual situation. In section 3, opposed book worship, Mao says, guys, stop believing something just because it's in a book or because it was a directive from a higher organ. Investigate it yourself. Section 4. Without investigating the actual situation, there is bound to be an idealist appraisal of class forces and an idealist guidance in work, resulting in either opportunism or putschism. Let's break this down. Without investigating the actual situation, without investigating reality, it will result in an idealist appraisal of the class forces, aka a non-material analysis of reality, social reality, and he says an idealist guidance in work, aka plans built off of idealism, aka plans that are not materialist, that plans that throw away materialism. So what's going to happen then when you do that? When your analysis is not material and when your plans are not material. Well, he says that's going to represent an opportunism. It's going to result in putschism. Opportunism is, how do you put it? Lenin says this. Lenin says the opportunist does not betray his party. He does not act as a traitor. He does not desert it. He continues to serve it sincerely and zealously, but his typical and characteristic trait is that he yields to the mood of the moment. He is unable to resist what is fashionable. He is politically short-sighted and spineless. Opportunism means sacrificing the permanent and essential interests of the party to the momentary, transient, and minor interests. That's a Lenin quote. I wish I could tell you what that's from. I didn't write down the source. So, opportunism is when one throws away their beliefs or what they try to portray as their beliefs. They get rid of them in the face of a given situation, not because the situation proves them wrong, but because it's easier or more profitable to be opportunistic. Lenin, others believe this mentality mainly applied to socialists who stress too much on reforms instead of revolution, with all the consequences that go with this policy, and especially like class collaboration and the like. He says, if you're not a materialist, your plans will be opportunistic or based in putschism, the belief that revolution should take place by means of a putsch. There's some famous examples of that. Section 4. Mao says, do you doubt this conclusion? Fact will force you to accept it. Just try and appraise the political situation or guide the struggle without making any investigation. And you will see whether or not such appraisal or guidance is groundless and idealist, and whether or not it will lead to opportunist or putschist errors. Certainly it will. This is not because of failure to make careful plans before taking action, but Because of failure to study the specific social situation carefully before making the plans, as often happens in our Red Army guerrilla units. Officers of the Li Kuei type do not discriminate when they punish the men for offenses. And I'll just pause and say, oh, that sounds like a good thing if you have the Western mind, if you participated in conversations about discrimination. Oh, they don't discriminate? That's good, right? They're not being racist and stuff? No, that's not what that means. He's saying they're not using enough judgment. They're not analyzing the situation enough. They're not discriminating the situation enough. It's not about, discrimination in the way that you might be thinking of it. He says, as a result, the offenders feel they've been unfairly treated. Many disputes ensue, and the leaders lose all prestige. Does this not happen frequently in the Red Army? He asks. Sorry. We're right about here. He says, we must wipe out idealism and guard against all opportunist and putschist errors before we can succeed in winning over the masses and defeating the enemy. And unfortunately, he doesn't give us an example of putschism, but I think you get the idea. He finishes by saying, the only way to wipe out idealism is to make the effort and investigate the actual situation. So, when you realize, and if you are a dialectical materialist understander, you understand that materialism is a worldview. It's part of a worldview that reveals social reality for what it is. Therefore, the opposite of materialism, being idealism, does not reveal social reality for what it is. So if you're applying an idealist analysis, you're pretending to know reality, but you don't. In section 4, without investigating the actual situation, there's bound to be an idealist appraisal of class forces and an idealist guidance in work, resulting either in opportunism or in putschism. Mao is saying, investigate. Don't pretend to know. And that'll take us to section 5. The aim of social and economic investigation is to arrive at a correct appraisal of class forces and then to formulate correct tactics for the struggle. Mao says, this is our answer to the question, why do we have to investigate social and economic conditions? Accordingly, the object of our investigation is all the social classes and not fragmentary social phenomena. We want a class analysis. We don't want anecdotal evidence. Of late, the comrades in the Fourth Army of the Red Army have generally given attention to the work of investigation. But the method many of them employ is wrong. I've got a little footnote here. It says Mao always laid great stress on investigation regarding social investigation as the most important task and the basis for defining policy in the work of leadership. The work of investigation was gradually developed in the Fourth Army of the Red Army on Comrade Mao Zedong's initiative. He stipulated that social investigation should be a regular part of the work, and the political department of the Red Army prepared detailed forms covering such items as the state of the mass struggle, the condition of the reactionaries, the economic life of the people, and the amount of land owned by each class in the rural areas. This is how you do analysis in China at the time. Wherever the Red Army went, it first made itself familiar with the class situation in the locality and then formulated slogans suited to the needs of the masses. Damn, that sounds fucking thoughtful as shit. House says the results of their investigation are therefore as trivial as the grocer's accounts. That's when the method of the Fourth Army, of the Red Army, in their investigation is wrong. It's as trivial as grocer's accounts, or resemble the many strange tales a country bumpkin hears when he comes to town, or are like a distant view of a populous city from a mountain top. And I love those. I love that sentence. He's very poetic, isn't it? I love those like analogies and whatnot. It's great. He says this kind of investigation is of little use and cannot achieve our main purpose. So again, that's like the fragmentary social phenomena, the random bits of info, the anecdotal evidence. We don't need that. We need a class analysis, he says. Mao says, for example, when we investigate the composition of the peasantry, not only must we know the number of owner peasants, semi-owner peasants, and tenant peasants who are differentiated according to tenancy relationships, but more especially, we must know the number of rich peasants, middle peasants, and poor peasants who are differentiated according to class or strata. When we investigate the composition of the merchants, not only must we know the number in each trade, such as grain, clothing, medicinal herbs, etc., but more especially, we must know the number of small merchants, middle merchants, and big merchants. We should investigate not only the state of each trade, but more especially the class relations within it. We should investigate the relationships not only between the different trades, but more especially between the different classes. He says our chief method of investigation must be to dissect the different social classes, the ultimate purpose being to understand their interrelations, to arrive at a correct appraisal of class forces, and then to formulate the correct tactics for the struggle, defining which classes constitute the main force in the revolutionary struggle, which classes are to be won over as allies, and which classes are to be overthrown. This is our sole purpose. What are the social classes requiring investigation? They are the industrial proletariat, the handicraft workers, the farm laborers, the poor peasants, the urban poor, the lumpen proletariat, the master handicraftsmen, the small merchants, the middle peasants, the rich peasants, the landlords, the commercial bourgeoisie, and the industrial bourgeoisie. In our investigation, we should give attention to the state of all these classes or strata. Only in the industrial proletariat and industrial bourgeoisie are absent in the areas where we are now working. And we constantly come across all the others. Our tactics of struggle are tactics in relation to all these classes and strata. He says another serious shortcoming in our past investigations has been the undue stress on the countryside to the neglect of our towns, so that many comrades have always been vague about our tactics towards the urban poor and the commercial bourgeoisie. The development of the struggle has enabled us to leave the mountains for the plains. Here, the mountains are the Jinggang Mountains area along the borders of Jiangxi and Hunan provinces. The plains are those in the southern Jiangxi and western Fujian. In January 1929, Mao Zedong led the main force of the Fourth Army of the Red Army down from the Jinggang Mountains to southern Jiangxi and western Fujian in order to set up two large revolutionary base areas. He says we've left the mountains for the plains. We've descended physically, he says, but we are still up in the mountains mentally. We must understand the towns as well as the countryside, or we shall be unable to meet the needs of the revolutionary struggle. And he's talking about how they have done a good job with the rural peasants, but because of that, they don't understand the urban poor and the commercial bourgeoisie. That's because they've not done a good enough class analysis. In Section 5, the aim of social and economic investigation is to arrive at a correct appraisal of class forces and then to formulate correct tactics for the class struggle. Mao says, do class analysis, then develop your tactics for struggle. How many sections we got left? Oh, just two? Okay, I guess we can do this. I guess we'll finish today. Section 6. Victory in China's revolutionary struggle will depend on the Chinese comrades' understanding of Chinese conditions. You'll notice that he doesn't say it'll depend on the Chinese comrades' understanding of Russian conditions. Wow. That wouldn't make sense. He says the aim of our struggle is to attain socialism via the stage of democracy. In this task, and that there's so much going on there in that first sentence. I'm just going to let him cook, So he says, in this task, the first step is to complete the democratic revolution by winning the majority of the working class and arousing the peasant masses and the urban poor for the overthrow of the landlord class, imperialism, and the Kuomintang regime. The next step is to carry out the socialist revolution, which will follow on the development of this struggle. The fulfillment of this great revolutionary task is no simple or easy job and will depend entirely on correct and firm tactics on the part of the proletarian party. In this section, Mao says, the revolution depends on correct Communist Party tactics. Previous section was talking about how tactics rely on an accurate class analysis. So you can see how this is all building. He says, if its tactics of struggle are wrong or irresolute and wavering, the revolution will certainly suffer temporary defeat. It must be borne in mind that the bourgeois parties, too, constantly discuss their tactics of struggle. They are considering how to spread reformist influences among the working class so as to mislead it and turn it away from Communist Party leadership, how to get the rich peasants to put down the uprisings of the poor peasants, and how to organize gangsters to suppress the revolutionary struggles. Many such cases. In a situation when the class struggle grows increasingly acute and is waged at close quarters, the proletariat has to depend for its victory entirely on the correct and firm tactics of struggle of its own party, the Communist Party. The Communist Party's correct and unswerving tactics of struggle can in no circumstance be created by a few people sitting in an office. They emerge in the course of mass struggle, that is, through actual experience. Therefore, we must at all times study social conditions and make practical investigations. Those comrades who are inflexible, conservative, formalistic, and groundlessly optimistic think that the present tactics of struggle are perfect, that the book of documents of the party's Sixth National Congress guarantees lasting victory, and that one can always be victorious merely by adhering to the established methods. The Book of Documents consisted of the resolutions adopted at the Sixth National Congress of the Communist Party in China in July of 1928, including the political resolution and the resolutions on the peasant question, the land question, the organization of political power, etc. Early in 1929, the Front Committee of the Fourth Army of the Red Army published these resolutions in book form for distribution to the party organizations, into the Red Army, and to the local party organizations. These ideas are absolutely wrong and have nothing in common with the idea that communists should create favorable new situations through struggle. They represent a purely conservative line. Unless it is completely discarded, this line will cause great losses to the revolution and do harm to these comrades themselves. There are obviously some comrades in our Red Army who are content to leave things as they are, who do not seek to understand anything thoroughly and are groundlessly optimistic. And they spread the fallacy that this is proletarian. They eat their fill and sit dozing in their offices all day long without ever moving a step and going out among the masses to investigate. When they open their mouths, their platitudes make people sick. To awaken these comrades, we must raise our voices and cry out to them. Change your conservative ideas without delay. Replace them by progressive and militant communist ideas. Get into the struggle. Go among the masses and investigate the facts. Section 7. Is this the last section? I think this is it. Section 7. I'm starting to get tired, I'll be honest. Section 7, the technique of investigation. 1. Hold fact-finding meetings and undertake investigation through discussions. This is the only way to get near the truth. It is easy to commit mistakes if you do not hold fact-finding meetings for investigation through discussions, but simply rely on one individual relating his own experience. Two, what kind of people should attend the fact-finding meetings? They should be people well acquainted with social and economic conditions. As far as age is concerned, older people are best, because they are rich in experience and not only know what is going on, but understand the causes and effects. Young people with experience of struggle should also be included because they have progressive ideas and sharp eyes. As far as occupation is concerned, there should be workers, peasants, merchants, intellectuals, and occasionally soldiers, and sometimes even vagrants. Naturally, when a particular subject is being looked into, Those who have nothing to do with it need not be present. For example, workers and peasants and students need not attend when commerce is the subject of investigation. 3. Which is better? A large fact-finding meeting or a small one? Well, that depends on the investigator's ability to conduct a meeting. If he's good at it, a meeting of as many as a dozen or even 20 or more people can be called. A large meeting has its advantages. From the answers, you get fairly accurate statistics, that is, in finding out the percentage of poor peasants in the total peasant population, for instance, I should say. And you get fairly correct conclusions, for instance, in finding out whether equal or differentiated land distribution is better. Of course, it has its disadvantages too. Unless you are skillful in conducting meetings, you will find it difficult to keep order. So the number of people attending a meeting depends on the competence of the investigator. However, the minimum is 3, or otherwise the information obtained will be too limited to correspond to the real situation. 4. Prepare a detailed outline for the investigation. A detailed outline should be prepared beforehand, and the investigator should ask questions according to the outline, with those present at the meeting giving their answers. Any points which are unclear or doubtful should be put up for discussion. The detailed outline should include main subjects and subheadings, and also detailed items. For instance, taking commerce as a main subject, it can have such subheadings as cloth, grain, other necessities, and medicinal herbs. Again, under cloth, there can be such detailed items as calico, homespun, and silk and satin. 5. Personal participation. Everyone with responsibility for giving leadership, from the chairman of the township government to the chairman of the central government, to the detachment leader to the commander-in-chief, from the secretary of a party branch to the general secretary, must personally undertake investigation into the specific social and economic conditions and not merely rely on reading reports. For investigation and reading reports are two entirely different things. 6. Probe deeply. Wink. Anyone new to investigation work should make 1 or 2 thorough investigations in order to gain full knowledge of a particular place, say a village or a town, of a particular problem, say the problem of grain or currency. Deep probing into a particular place or problem will make future investigation of other places or problems easier. 7. Make your own notes. The investigator should not preside at fact-finding meetings and give proper guidance to those present, but should also make his own notes and record the results himself. To have others do it for him is no good. So in this section, Mao's talking about how to investigate. Hold fact-finding meetings. What people should be at the meetings. Should the meeting be small or big? When you do an investigation, make it an outline. You should personally participate. You should probe deeply on things and you'll get better at it. And make sure you make your own notes. So you can see this is really sort of pointed at a specific group of people. This is not for your average person. This was for people participating in party work. This is for people in the Red Army. However, when he says no investigation, no right to speak, you go, oh man, I could think of about 100 different conversations that have gone a lot better if the person would have just shut up instead of piped up. Instead of asking a question, the person was making claims. Yeah. Oh, I do have a preface to oppose book worship written in 1961. I think this will give a little bit more context. And I mentioned this before, but this is an old article. It's a preface I'm assuming Mao wrote himself. He says this is an old article which was written to oppose dogmatism in the Red Army at the time. At the time, we did not use the term Kiao Tiao Chui, which means dogmatism. We didn't use the term dogmatism, but rather book worship. I'm not going to attempt the pronunciation. The article was written approximately in the spring of 1930. He says, it's already been 30 years since I've read it. In January 1961, Mao, suddenly found it in the Central Revolutionary Museum. The Central Revolutionary Museum had found it in the Fujian Longyan Area Committee. In reading it, I find it still has some use, so I have had printed a good many copies as reference for comrades. And that was the preference to the book in 1961. So it was written to oppose dogmatism in the Red Army. So it's not really a work to shove in the face of baby leftists in the Imperial Corps who won't shut the fuck up, even though you may feel it applies to them. This regards to party work, more specifically military work. And despite this, the main lesson, I think, still rings true. With regards to discourse, it would be better if people stopped pretending to know what they're talking about when they don't have any idea what they're talking about. Most people need to learn intellectual humility. And that goes for everybody, including this person, me. I wish I knew how to learn more about the context surrounding this work. It's like he's writing sort of like rules, and everyone knows anything about rules knows that there's a reason for every rule. So someone broke the rule that he's talking about, and I wonder, who he had in mind when he wrote this. Who's living in Mao's head rent free? So that was Oppose Book Worship by Mao Zedong. I hope you enjoyed reading that. We're going to continue reading Maoist communist philosophy. Next, we'll read Where Do Correct Ideas Come From? We'll also be reading On Practice and On Contradiction. These are grouped together to show the importance of practice and how it relates to theory, how we should conduct ourselves in order to avoid dogmatism, and provide a deeper understanding to Marxist philosophy. If you enjoyed reading this with me today, if you got something out of this, anything at all, and if you have a couple bucks laying around, I could use a couple bucks. You can support my content on Twitch with a subscription. You could support on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. You'll get early access to content there, and you can support with a tip directly through Stream Elements or through PayPal, Cash App, Venmo. My name is iDan Simpson or idansimpson@gmail.com, depending on the app. Thanks for being with me today. Join me next time as we read Where Do Correct Ideas Come From? Love your face.